Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and I'm excited about you taking a few minutes this week to reflect and listen with us to just a great talk that really puts us right in the season that we're in of gratitude, of thankfulness. For those of you listening to this on schedule, it's Thanksgiving week in the U.S., and we are excited to think about all the ways in which we're grateful. And I remember it being said once that gratitude is one of the least expressed virtues. And I know if we think about it in each of our own lives, that can probably be true. The busier we get, the more that we have, the more time that we spend doing multiple activities or even more friends and relationships that enter our lives. Sometimes we get so busy moving from one thing to the next that we don't often take time to just stop, reflect, and really show gratefulness and be grateful. I know for our children, sometimes when we see that they're starting to act a little like they're entitled, or you start to see some things come out of them where they're just expecting some things to work out or to be there for them that aren't. Rebecca and I's first rule is go get out your grateful journal, sit down and start making a gratitude list. It's an instant game changer in terms of everybody's attitude, everybody getting back into the right perspective, really recognizing what's true, what's happening right now in the world that they're living in, and kind of getting them outside of that to just appreciate the big world around them and all the ways in which God's blessing their lives. So as you listen to this 9-minute talk by Voskamp, you're going to be listening to somebody who literally wrote the book on gratitude. Her book sold over 1 million copies, where she literally wrote the book called 1,000 Gifts, A Dare to Live Fully Right Where You Are. And this bestseller on the New York Times list was on the list for over 60 weeks because it resonated with the human heart and this need to show gratitude, to understand the nature of gratitude and why it's just critical in our lives. So as you head into this week, or maybe you're listening to this later and it's the Christmas season, or maybe it's the new year, just take a moment to make your own grateful list. Let's listen in to Voskamp.
The guy down at your corner store. He heard the Harvard academics in their white lab coats, proved that the guy on probation and the kid cutting herself and the woman who just wants to throw in the towel and everybody else facing their own hard battles, if they wrote down just 3 things a day they were grateful for, they were less depressed, less suicidal, less apathetic than those who didn't practice lifestyle gratitude. That's what the guy thought. Well, take it or leave it. We all get to decide, doxology or dark. So it happened all around town, these guys picking up their pen and writing down 3 gifts a day. Because the research indicated that recording those blessings was cognitive training, a way of reorganizing your brain to focus on goodness, that it increases an individual's positive focus by 25%. What community, what family, what city doesn't need to increase their positive focus by 25% for free? So the women in the carpool line, they started counting gifts while they waited. And they could testify exactly what the scientific research proves. Those who practice lifestyle gratitude, who pick up a pen and just write down 3 things they're grateful for each day, have higher levels of alertness, enthusiasm, optimism, attentiveness, energy. We're more motivated, likable, other-oriented, forgiving, generous, helpful, more likely to volunteer, and more likely to give back. That's what the whole town found out. Giving thanks and giving back are Siamese twins. They move as one. Hundreds of experiments across countless labs posit one deafening conclusion. Gratitude interventions result in radical, transformative improvements to personal and societal well-being. So that's what the community said. Take it or leave it. We all get to decide doxology or dark. And Chesterton said, thanks is the highest form of thought. To think is to thank. And if we aren't the people known for thanking God, maybe we aren't thinking enough of God. So it started a bit like a revolution around town. People in pews and in checkout queues, all looking for the good to be grateful for, and they witnessed it firsthand. Gratitude decreases selfishness, decreases greed, increases a focus on good, which increases levels of trust, which altogether constitutes the necessary elements for societal flourishing. That was their epiphany. Gratitude is what lies at the very heart of ethical societal ethics. Instead of making the misstep of relegating gratitude to the realm of domesticity or feminine piety or Pollyannism, they experience the transformation. Any deep healing in community will always be associated with deep gratitude. Now, the strange thing is, in spite of the magnitude of the benefits of gratitude, the White Coat Lab folks found that gratitude often makes men feel anxious because of their sense of indebtedness and obligation and self-sufficiency. But the men who did count 3 gifts a day, in fact, experienced a greater sense of well-being from the gratitude interventions than women. Though men may not initially value gratitude, like women, they actually have more to gain from gratitude than women. That's what the guys around town realized. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, give thanks in everything, for this is the will of God. That's exactly what the whole community awakened to. Just like when Jehoshaphat sent that choir out in front of the army singing, give thanks to the Lord, and gratitude sent the dark horde fleeing, the determining factor to defeating the dark is not a strategy of reactivity or hostility or negativity, but a strategy of doxology. So that guy in the hard marriage and the woman with the harder kid, that's what they did every single time they faced the dark. They closed their eyes and saw themselves standing in a dark hole with a shovel. And no matter how hard you try to shovel out the dark, more darkness sweeps in. Because this is always the thing. You cannot force out the darkness. What you can do is reflect the light, amplify the light, magnify the light, so more light drives out the darkness. To pay the dark most of our attention is to mostly praise the devil. To focus on the dark makes the dark seem stronger than the light, which is precisely why now is the time for a radical rising of gratitude, of light amplifiers. Gratitude amplifies goodness so that you can hear the grace of God. Gratitude amplifies the light of God so you can see the face of God in the midst of the dark. There was this woman who counted 3 gifts a day, who amplified the light, and she held up a photo of her baby for me to see because she canceled her appointment for an abortion, because she realized even the unexpected can be counted as a gift. There was a man who held up the point of his pen and whispered to me how he'd planned on plunging the point of a gun to the temple and ending it all. But the point of that pen counting gifts had amplified all this light that he hadn't seen before, and he was walking toward that light. And there are these 1 million people who have dared to live lifestyle gratitude, to amplify the goodness of his redemptive light, and they testify to change souls and cities. If you're grateful, you're not fearful. And if you're not fearful, you're not violent, you're peaceful. If you're grateful, you act out of the truth of abundance and not the myth of scarcity, and you become a reign of generosity that we all desperately need. Those 1 million people who kept thanks on their lips for their colleagues and their kids and their Creator, they testified that gratitude stopped vicious cycles of dysfunction and created these virtuous cycles. Gratefulness amplifies goodness, which enhances wellness, which magnifies generousness, and multiplies more gratefulness. The universal pattern throughout Scripture and the studies and their own experiences is this powerful paradox. There has to be a revolution of authentic gratitude for there to be an authentic resolution of issues. They all thought when you are finally joyful, then you can finally be grateful. But the Scripture and studies and their own gratitude interventions proved otherwise. Only when you finally give thanks will you finally get to be joyful. Being joyful isn't what makes you grateful. Being grateful is what makes you joyful. Gratitude in our circumstances is essential to our wholeness as any change in our circumstances. And yeah, no, you may be thinking the dark you're facing in your community, your family, your city, your life is too dark. But Jesus, when he was staring right into the very face of evil, what does he do? Out of a universe of supernatural options, what does Jesus decide? And on the night he was betrayed, Jesus broke bread, lifted it, and gave thanks. If Jesus can give thanks in that, you can give thanks in anything. If Jesus chooses gratitude as elemental in destroying evil, do you have a better weapon against the dark? If out of a cosmos of choices, Jesus chose to give thanks in the face of evil, then maybe our giving thanks is how we advance the good. Gloria Steinem, she said it once, gratitude never radicalized anybody. But you ask the 1 million people who dared to count 1,000 gifts of their own, and that's what they all say. Gratitude never fails to radicalize the radically grateful. When you are radically grateful for what you have, you will go to radical lengths to share it. When you are radically grateful for being blessed, you are radically generous to the oppressed. You can't be truly grateful and not be moved. Gratitude starts movements. Real gratitude doesn't make you apathetic. It makes you a real activist. Radical gratitude is the attitude of the revolutionaries. So the world turns and life surges up, one grace given after another. The last of the light catching right now in a maple tree down in Central Park. Some elderly woman thanking a man right now as he helps her off a bus in LA. A cop keeping his beat on the back streets of a quiet town in Kansas. A dying child in a hospital right now in Georgia being tended to by a nurse with aching feet. And your heart beating 100,000 times a day and 190,000 stars being birthed over us every single minute. And we all know we need someone to thank. And the people known by gratitude are the ones who can make God known. The people known by gratitude make their life about the language of gratitude, that language of friendship with man and of friendship with God. Because the one word that will come unplanned to your lips at your very end is the one word worth planning to live your one and very beautiful life by. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Ann Voskamp as she just shared with us so much on this topic of gratitude. One thing that I appreciated about this, especially relates to our cultural moment, is this idea that any deep healing in any community will always be associated with deep gratitude. I think what Ann is raising here is something we've been experiencing even over this last week. Some of you participated in our Q Dinners events that were happening all over the country, all over the world. We had over 1,000 people like you come in and say, we want to do this with you. And all in 1 week, people hosted these dinners in their homes. They welcomed people in from their neighborhood, from their workplaces, friends maybe that were at their church. And they said, let's have an intentional dinner together. Let's break bread together. Let's have real conversations together. Let's heal our divided nation, but let's do it one meal at a time, one conversation at a time. And I think just that spirit of eating, of being at the table, of really being grateful for relationships, for people who are in your life, really moves conversation to a different level. And if you didn't participate in Q Dinners, you can learn more about those at qdinners.com. In the new year, we'll actually be having another week where we're going to be inviting so many of our listeners like you to be proactive with having real conversations about topics that are really important and really matter, but many times don't have space in our current society to be aired, to be discussed, to be honestly debated and talked about with those you care about and those you love. And so we're going to just continue to tee that up and make that possible and have so many of you responding to that, which has just been so exciting. In fact, national news started to cover the story. And that's the sort of thing we believe at Q is so fun to watch because it really gives the idea of the Christian faith motivating these types of real conversations, this type of hospitality, This to me is the essence of what our faith ought to be doing in our society. And so when the world starts to pay attention and says, wait, the Christians are doing something a little different here. They're actually opening their doors. They're having some of these substantive conversations. There's a longing in people's hearts to do that very thing. And when we can take the lead, when we can welcome anybody into these kinds of conversations, I think it really matters to them. I think it's inspiring to them. I think it's encouraging to them. And I think in a world where that's happening less and less, it's going to be more important for us to lead and to do this more and more. Well, thank you for listening in to this edition of the Q Podcast. As always, if you want to watch this talk online, go to qideas.org and you can watch this. Maybe if it's Thanksgiving week and you want to gather your family around and watch this 9-minute talk as a way of creating this conversation, do that. And then I highly recommend invite everybody to start making their own grateful list. What a great way to go into this weekend where everything's about shopping and buying things and getting more, and to just stop and say, hey, as Christians, you know what? Let's stop. Let's stop consuming, and let's take a moment to just be grateful for what God's given us and all the people around us and all the experiences and all the good things that we have in our life. And that sort of perspective change, I think, will represent a great countercultural posture in a world that's looking for that kind of change. Hope you have a wonderful week and a wonderful holiday season ahead.